It is patch notes o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. 3.4 Cepheus is on the horizon and will be launched together with Overlord, and there is a lot of stuff to go through. Man, I cannot believe how big this patch actually is and how impactful it is, and I'm actually really looking forward to this one. In terms of overview for today, however, we will not be taking a look at the features of the update. That will be a separate video. Overlord is its own thing. You're only here to be interested in all the free stuff that you're going to be getting for this particular installment of Stellaris. 3.4 Cepheus Situations is a major change to the game. Essentially what it means is that, well, let's put things into perspective by going into the game itself. Right now within the game, if something is happening, let's say you're running out of resources or anything like that, nothing really happens. You're sure your population will be upset, for example, but there is no knock-on effects. Situations, however, is going to completely change this, where if you have a lack of resources, that you're going to run into a potential death spiral unless you do something about it. And this is a major change in terms of internal politics. Internal politics is not something we've had so far, and I really, really like this change. And as I talked to Steven a couple of weeks ago, well, last week at this point, he already talked about a little bit when it comes to internal politics and that we're going to be seeing those changes. And I really think that this is a necessary first step to something bigger there. Deficit rework. Running out of resources now carries penalties that accumulate over time. This is also part of situations. Rework subjugation. So in this particular game, I do not have any subjects with me at the moment, but if I had, for instance, I would be able to go to one of my screens and basically say, hey, I can go into the contacts and say, okay, vassal of mine, what can you do for me and what can I do for you? And this all comes with this particular update. The new Prospectoria, the Scolaria, the Bulwarks, etc. are not of this part of this update, but again, an interesting change of pace and really adds value to the overall flow of the game. And once again, internalized politics. We're not talking about like empire internal politics, but more like vassalization politics. Micromanagement Improvement. Cepheus adds more options to reduce micromanagement on planet and sector interfaces. This is not something that we actually have talked about on this channel. However, for instance, if I want to have a sector, something that I would almost never do, essentially we have more options on what those sectors are supposed to do or what a planet is supposed to do if we automate this. And essentially an extra menu pops up as soon as you automate things, and you can better guide how things run into stuff. 6th anniversary portraits, empire emblems, colors, and backgrounds. Over 73 new icons have been added to the game. 50 new colors, 45 new backgrounds. Those are basically the empire backgrounds, etc. are being added, so you can have more customization. But yeah, it's pretty big in terms of details. Let's go into those details and let's skip over all the Overlord stuff. We will get to that separately. First of all, Cepheus Situations, we already talked about that. The stuff regarding the deficit situations, revolt situations, if you have low stability on a planet, the chance of revolt happening is very high. Machine rising situations, where the old machine uprising system, where you could essentially have a machine uprising if you didn't treat your robots very well. Usually that is handled over in the policy screen, and if you go all the way down in policies, specifically robotic workers, you can run into this particular scenario, and that is now handled through situations. Leviathan situations, which allow you to celebrate great triumphs. I don't know how that would work, but apparently if you kill Leviathan, you have a situation that allows for a triumph to be had, as well as narrative situations that have implemented to add more flavor, and that's not particularly clear, but once the actual patch lands, we can go into a little bit more detail. This is a interesting one. There's Legion's Wars being added. If you are a vassal or somebody is a vassal, they can pledge fealty secretly to another empire, and essentially allows for a war over legions where both empire will go to war over that particular vassal, which is rather interesting. Holdings are being added, which is pretty cool, and they may be locked behind certain Civics origins or DLCs. We have something like the Ranger Lodge, which is locked behind environmental civics. Let's put it this way. I love this for a variety of reasons. The main reason is that I really like the idea of having content locked behind a civic. It really adds a certain level of uniqueness to the actual thing rather than just a flat bonus. Have a 10% bonus to minerals, for instance, in a civic, or something that you would get from, say, mining guilds or something along the lines, which adds a +1 mineral to every single mining job. Having all of these buildings adds so much more additional flavor, and I really, really like that. And in addition to that, it also gives additional life to all of these expansions, such as, for instance, Sacrificial Shrine, Death Cult civics for Necroids. I would say that this is probably something to do with the fact that you can put something on a planet, which is a shrine on a vassal world, and now they will be the one that are dying for you rather than your own population, and you can still get the growth bonus, as an example. There's a lot of really cool things here, and I do feel that there is a point in pointing all of this stuff out. Essentially, subjects now have a loyalty value rather than loyalty solely depending on their opinion. So previously what we had is that loyalty from vassals was based on their opinions, and opinions are like assholes. Everybody has them, and right now, for instance, the opinion towards us, right, this alien empire, is friendly. With vassals right now, before this patch lands, it is the same, but instead now it will be done with a loyalty system instead, which can be influenced in multiple ways, which I think is very cool. It adds another certain level of internal politics to the game. Subjects ethical compatibility with their overlords may result in monthly loyalty bonuses or penalties. That's actually really interesting. That's something that we're seeing in federations as well, where if you're not compatible when it comes to your ethics, so your ethics in this particular case, I'll give an example. If you are materialist or authoritarian and your vassal is the same, then you won't run into any loyalty problems. However, if they are something that is exactly opposite, let's say the egalitarian spiritualists, you're going to run into problems, which means that you probably will want to do, I don't know, a war against them in the ideology variety, which is really important in order to balance things out. What you could also do is claim territory in a defensive war or an ideology war, and basically say, click status quo, and the conquered systems become a new vassal, which also flips to those particular types of ethics, which I think is really, really interesting as well. Having more than one subject adds a penalty. We already talked a little bit about this. Subjects and overlords have a bonus to infiltration growth on each other, so you'll be able to see things easier to other things within your subjective empire. Operations are the same deal. I guess that makes sense. Operations are still woefully underpowered, but having this would be nice. Additional trade deal options between subjects and overlords have been added. They aren't going into too many details here on what those are, but I'm looking forward to see what that is. Releasing a sector as a subject now grants an initial 100 intel on that subject. Why you would ever release part of your empire as a subject is beyond me, but, you know, like, why would I ever let go of this part of space, right? Like, I invested time and resources into this. Integration is now disabled by default. Fascinating. Sectors released as subjects can now inherit the following origins from their parent empire where appropriate, which is Progenitor Hive, Subterranean Void Dweller, and Calamitous Birth. So, my Hive Mind, Lithoid Dwarves, Void Dwellers make sense in Calamitous Birth. Essentially, major impact ones are impacted here. Gateways and hyper relays can now be built in subject space, which is a godsend. Okay, so one thing that I think is a huge deal. Let's say I want to take this empire over here, right? And I would want to build a gateway in it. And I have my gateway network set up all over my empire, but I want to also be able to project my power to this part of space. Previously, I would need to claim this system over here or this black hole over here, put a vassalization war on this empire, then vassalize them whilst also claiming the system so I could get control of it, then build a gateway inside of it, and that would be the steps that you would need to take. Now you can just build them wherever you want inside of vassal territory, which is such a godsend. It is amazing. I love that, and it was something that was needed for such a long time. AI subjects now receive AI bonuses as the difficulty level of the game were one level lower, rather than losing their bonuses entirely. I didn't even know that that was the case. So empires in Stellaris are rather fascinating, and let me just quickly here observe in this particular scenario. It was observe. There we go. So all of these empires are run by AI, right? And based on your difficulty level, they don't necessarily play better. They just get higher bonuses. So they will get a bonus on consumer good production or food production, and that scales based on difficulty. And apparently, if you had a vassal, those bonuses would be disabled completely, but that's no longer the case, which means that they can still compete. Which means that if you have a vassal, you will probably want to play on Grand Master or Grand Admiral, my apologies, in order to make sure that they can still compete with the same amount of production that you have, which is a pretty big deal. Which brings us to the Megacorp changes. Apparently Megacorps, they'll be able to do some things. Empires that are now the target of imposed ideology wars, or those who were created from a status quo peace deal, as I mentioned before, are no longer rival Megacorps if they are if you're playing as a Megacorporation, but are instead oligarchies with a merchant guild civic. Very nice. You can at least place Megacorp buildings on that planet. Corporate overlords can establish branch offices in their non-corporate subjects without having to sign a commercial pact. Oh no, we're going to have subsidiaries all over the place, aren't we? Oh, that's great. Likewise, corporate subjects with a non-corporate overlord can open up branch offices in their overlord and fellow subjects, which means that if you are playing as Imperial Fiefdom, and if you're playing as Imperial Fiefdom, at least as far as I understand it, if you build a Megacorp in an Imperial Fiefdom, you can place them anywhere, but it also means that if you build an Imperial Fiefdom origin outside of your own Imperial Fiefdom origin, that Megacorporation can place holdings or branch offices in your location without issues. So you don't need to sign a commercial pact, which means you don't need to spend influence. Very nice. I like that. I like that a lot. But it does mean that playing as a corporation with under Imperial Fiefdom could be very, very powerful in this particular context. Very interesting. I wonder how this is going to play, actually. I kind of want to play as a corporation under a fiefdom now, because you can just place branch offices wherever and just drag in infinite resources. And especially, for instance, if you are a Scalaria or a Prospectorium, you can get crazy resources there. And the real question is whether or not that's going to be taxed by your overlord in terms of subsidies, etc. I can see a situation where a Bulwark or a Prospectorium can get crazy resources in terms of science by doing this. So this is definitely something I want to test. I want to try this out. This seems like a very interesting meta build right here. Major improvements on planetary automation, as we already talked about earlier. Planetary automation scripts based on designation are now more focused on regarding what they build. So essentially, if we go into the game and we tag back into our empire, if the game allows us, tag 0. Okay. Essentially, if I were to automate this planet, it will then automate itself to become a factory world, which makes a lot of sense, rather than, say, this planet, which is an agri-world. Therefore, it will focus more on agricultural districts. So for those of you who are playing super wide and have to deal with a million planets, that may be incredibly useful to them. Click and forget, so to speak, set the designation, and walk away. Like that, that's nice. It's not for me, but it's nice. Right-clicking the automation button will now open up a menu, which allows you to customize and focus your planetary automation, for instance, as well as the designation focus, build more mineral buildings. It allows you to handle enable handling of amenities, housing, crime, as well as more specialized building options such as Psycore. And you can basically tell the automation, hey, build these buildings automatically, please. I like it. I like it a lot. That's very nice. Sector automation and planetary automation have now been unified into the same system. Sector automation will activate planetary automation for all the planets in the sector. Okay, so it works in the same way as just discussed and assign relevant planetary designation types. Unless overridden. That's very cool. I may actually automate sectors now, if I had them, because I don't like sectors at all. I prefer the old sector system, but I will give it a go. I will give it a go and try it out, because automation is always nice. Additional planetary or sector automation options have been added. Add Unity sector for automation. Let's quickly go back into Stellaris here. Let's go into sectors. We have a sector. That is very nice. So let's say we have sector settings. We now have a Unity-focused version of that. That is nice. Also, Forge, Factory, and Industrial designations are available on Ring Worlds, which is nice. That's more of a Ring World thing. And Fortress World designation is now available in Machine Worlds and Hive Worlds. Interesting. More designations, basically, and more options. I wonder if those bonuses will also work here, especially on Ring Worlds. So yeah, if you're playing the Ring World start, you may want to play around with this. Actually, no, it does, because you have 3 additional segments. You cannot change the designation on your capital. But if you are doing a Ring World start, then you can get all 3 of these in addition to the ones that you would already have. Automatic resettlement improvements. Automatic resettlement formula for picking which pops will resettle to have been improved. It's now easy to steer pops towards your capital and other special worlds like Ring Worlds. Pop will now pick which planet to auto-migrate to based on which planet has the most free jobs rather than the least. Thank God, I can now finally fill up my Ecumenopolis rather easy. They will now also take free housing into account better. Nice. Ideal worlds such as Ring Worlds, Gaias, Hives, Machine Worlds will now have a 50% higher score, so they'll migrate there sooner. So no longer will they migrate to Tatooine in the middle of Bumble mess nowhere, and they will actually try to go where they need to go. Such as I mentioned, the aforementioned Ecumenopolis, which is always a pain in the ass to fill up properly. The resettlement tooltip found by hovering over unemployment. So let's go into the game. Unemployment right now, unemployed pops, it doesn't tell me anything. Instead, it will actually show you why a pop cannot migrate. So if they are slaves and you don't have a slave processing center, you will now see that, hey, you need a slave processing center in order to have this pop moved. Same thing goes for robots. So I think that's really nice. That's a nice little quality of life thing. The Outlier has been updated so the planets with unemployed pops are now automated, that are auto-migrating are now shown in as a yellow suitcase. The red suitcase will only appear if the planet actually requires your attention. So we know when pops are moving, basically. That's cool. Cool. Also, for those of you who are Japanese and Korean and or like it, you can read that now. So there you go. We are now 15 minutes in and we've only just arrived at the balance segment. Subjugation casus belli is now automatically granted towards inferior empires. Thank the Lord. Okay, so what would happen before is that, let's say I want to subjugate this empire. I would need to go, and they are weaker to me. Not in this particular case, but as an example. I would first need to demand tribute. Then wait for them to say, no, I don't want to be tributized. Then declare war on them. Instead, now we can just go straight into declaring war and say, I want to subjugate you. It's 2 or 3 less clicks, but it's a quality of life thing. I like that. It's a small thing, but it adds a lot of value. The Parliamentary Civic is now allows factions to be generated much earlier in the game, which essentially means that if you are running Parliamentary, which is a reform government thing, Parliamentary, let's take a look here. Parliamentary, what did it do before? Parliamentary system. Previously, it gave faction unity plus 40%. But now it also, or it removes this. It looks like it adds it. So parliamentary system is a little bit stronger now. But essentially, you get your factions a little bit earlier. Now, the faction system, and I think that we're all very clear about this, it's terrible. It's not a lot of stuff here. But we get a lot of unity from this earlier on, which is a pretty big boost to empires that have heavy focus on traditions. I like that, which means that these sort of empires have a bit of a advantage, especially in the early game. This one is so good, I don't even, basically. Defense platforms have increased range, fire rate, tracking and hull points and are faster to build. I like how it's and hull points and are faster to build rather than a comma there. Mr. Freak, if you're the one that posted this, this is a grammatical error. Please fix it. Regardless, what that means for the game, and this is actually rather impactful in my personal opinion. So if we go and build a defense platform, like this Ishmir class defense platform, right? It has a certain range, but because of this change, it will now be able to engage at a larger range, which means in the early game, you can actually engage enemy fleets from a better range, which especially means if you're going up against corvettes and destroyers, you'll be able to take them out earlier. And in addition to that, they have more hull points, which is great as well. They have better tracking, so small stuff is going to be even more difficult. We'll have an even more difficult time trying to take on a station. The fire rate increase as well. Essentially, this feels like an early game boost to stations. Essentially, forcing players in the early game to build defense platforms. Because in the late game, with artillery of battleships, it doesn't matter. Battleships will annihilate stations. Unless it's a bulwark, but that's a different story altogether. But right now, this is a massive change for stations, and it may actually be super important to build additional defense platforms on choke points. Yes, they are a massive investment. Yes, you're better off building a fleet. But if you're up against a lot of small stuff, especially in the early game, with the additional bonus of the station, this may actually be a reasonable way of dealing with things. Because the station is garbage. It cannot defend itself. But still, you know, it's these small things. I like this. I like this a lot. Base price for prisoners with jobs doubled from 500 to 1,000 credits to make selling pops more viable. Prisoners with jobs, prisoner with job traits cost modifiers for the prisoner with jobs market has increased by about 10 times for the positive ones and 4 times for the negative ones. So if you have positive traits, they will be more expensive. And if they've got negative traits, they will be a lot cheaper. What this does mean is you cannot just go into the galactic market anymore and be like, I will have all the prisoners with jobs, please, that are available. And instead, there's more incentive to sell them. This is not something I ever do because pops are worth their weight in gold. But still, this is important stuff. But yeah, this prisoner with job thing is pretty important. Endgame crisis can now happen 25 years after 25 years rather than 50 instead of the end times. Not a big change. 25 years can be a long time, but still doesn't have all that much impact. This is a fun one. Plunder of War Goal increases the chance to steal relics that aren't the Galatron to 50%. What is the Plunder of War Goal, you may ask? The Plunder of War Goal is part of a origin. No, it's not part of an origin. It's actually part of a civic, a very important civic. And I wonder if I have access to it in this particular menu. I quickly need to take a look at it here, whether or not that is the case. It is not. I would need to go to the main menu for it. But essentially, the barbarians that you can play as can steal relics. And previously, I think it was maybe like 10% chance if you were bombing the enemy capital or something along those lines. It has now been boosted to 50%. So you can steal enemy relics. I didn't even know that was a thing before this. Like, I never really bothered with it. Because they are not all that powerful, especially considering the bonuses for barbaric despoilers. The amount of money that you get is very insignificant, especially once you quit the early game. And I still think it needs a little bit of a boost, but still, being able to steal relics is nice. Now, the main problem here is you have no idea what kind of relics the other empires have. That's a problem. Maybe add that to the intelligence system, please, there, Paradox. Humanistic Administration trait no longer provides increase to energy output. It now provides a plus 33% output to trait values. Humanistic Administration is a special technology that you can get from some of the traders that came with the game. And I believe it was a Megacorp, not entirely sure at this point. But they can give you a special technology called... no, it's not a technology, is it? It is... I think it's a bonus, actually. I think it is a Empire-wide modifier. So yeah, I think it's under modifiers, that Humanistic Administration. It's not a trait, it's a modifier. Pretty sure of that. But yeah, basically it increases trade value by 33%, which is a pretty big bonus. No longer gives you an increased energy output. That makes sense in context, because it is a mercantile approach. The Humanistic Shrine in particular it used to be really overpowered. It still is. But Humanistic Administration giving a bonus to energy doesn't make a lot of sense in retrospective. So having this bonus to trade value is actually a pretty big deal. Yeah, that could be really good if you manage to roll it. Oh, this is a fun one. Remove the requirement to have an upgraded capital building in order to build research labs or rare resource manufacturing facilities. You can have simple tier 1 colonies now. Do I have a simple tier 1 colony? Yes, I do. I currently am not allowed to build a lab, am I? No, I am not. But after this patch, I can. And why is this a big thing? It means that colonies, simple colonies, can be used in early game to crank out science. This is a boost to science rushing. Gets better though. Let's say that I have reformed my government or started off with the following. Let's take a look here. Oh, there's Barbaric with spoilers, by the way. Where are you? Functional architecture. Building slots +1. Let's say that I have functional architecture. It used to be even better, by the way. It used to be +2. But let's say I have functional architecture and I have a colony. I can build 2 research labs with a production of 26 science in every category instantly. That is a huge boon in the early game. After that, build a city district, build another lab. Build another city district, build another lab. And get one of the traditions. I believe it's the prosperity one. Not entirely sure. Doesn't matter. Build another lab. Never have to update that building until you get the required, I think it's 10 pops in order to build, or to upgrade that. And that is a big deal, especially if you have a large amount of pops, because it means that you will no longer have to deal with pop growth in that particular case. So you can sit back, relax, crank out your labs. Big boost to the science rushing here. Where was I? The Shared Destiny Ascension perk no longer affects subject integration cost or trust. Instead, removes the monthly loyalty penalty from having multiple subjects. If you are an Overlord, this is perfect. This is great because you can have as many vassals as you want. So, yeah. This is great for Overlords. That's nice. Grasp the Void Ascension perk now grants increased draw weight for FTL travel pack. Grasp the Void. Grasp the Void. Which one is that again? It sounds like one of the ones that I never use. Grasp the Void. It adds +5 starbase capacity, and you will have a better chance to pull one of the FTL technologies, such as hyperdrive or jump drive, etc. I wonder if it also impacts the new gateways, for instance, or the hyper relays. Could be very useful for Overlords, as an example. The Unbidden can no longer spawn in Pulsars. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Pulsars disable shields, and Unbidden are all about shields. And if they don't have shields, they will die, basically, because they just have hull. This is also why you run the magic gun that bypasses all shields and armor. Resistance is Frugal is no longer grants you strongholds. Okay, hold on here. Resistance is Frugal no longer grants your strongholds a unity production bonus of +3. Instead, it gives you 0.5 unity for every defensive army you have. Interesting. Let's take a look at this one. So, what was it again? Resistance is Frugal. Resistance is Frugal. I believe that's a unyielding tradition. So, a unity production of 3. So if I would currently build a fortress, soldier jobs +2, approximate job production, 6 armies. So you can get 0.5 unity for each defensive army that you have. So every single stronghold that you have, which costs 2 pops, will get you 3 unity. It's not a lot, but that can get out of control quickly, especially if you run martial law in that case. Get additional soldier jobs. Interesting. I think this needs a little bit of testing because it does feel like something that could be exploited if handled properly. Strength of legions and warbots now start with a rank 3. Oh, admirals and generals. So, strength of legions and warbots. Strength of legions and warbots are civics. Warbots is a robot civic. Strength of legions is, I think, a hive mind one, and it gives you rank 3 admirals and generals. If you are a determined exterminator, that could get pretty crazy. Determined exterminator with warbots, rank 3 admirals at the start of the game. Yeah, I can see that being a problem. Espionage operations now cost influence to start rather than energy credits. Costs have been reduced by a factor of 10. So back into the game, let's say that we want to have some espionage on this person over here. Commence when ready. So in this particular case, by a factor of 10, extorting a favor from these guys would cost us 75 influence. I currently have +2 a month. Is that worth the investment versus this? It's a nerf. It's a nerf to operations, basically. It's a shame. That is a shame. I would hope they wouldn't have touched that, because why would I ever use this system if I need... I understand that they're looking for ways of using influence, because back in the game right now, let's say that we have the... I hate the fact that you can no longer click on the influence and then go to your edicts. So because they have removed the influence cost from edicts and replaced it with unity, they are losing a sink for influence. And right now, the only way of really getting rid of influence in the late game is by using the galactic community or making claims on other empires. So I understand why they've done this, again, to make another sink for influence in the late game. But it does impact things in the early game, especially if you want to get information. It only costs 25 influence to gather information in this particular case. But still, I don't think this was a right choice. Add nanite deposit the scavenger bot system so you can use the reward for killing it. So nanites are an extremely rare distant stars deposit that only spawns in the L cluster, as far as I can remember. I don't think there's any normal spawns for nanites in the game, but having one in the scavenger bot system makes sense, because the scavenger bot does drop a piece of technology that is essentially use nanites to repair yourselves, so that makes sense. And having an additional source of nanites, which is arguably one of the best resources in the game because it allows you to use the transmutator building, could be really good. I like this. It adds flavor. It's nice. The Subterranean Empire from Seismic Disturbance in Cepheus Chains now spawns with the new Subterranean origin. How very nice. And Humanistic Data Modeling technology now provides +5 trade value. So Humanistic Data Modeling, or any sort of humanistic related stuff, no longer gives you energy, but it gives you trade value, as it should do. AI. Is there anything fun here? AI will now enable buildings that have been disabled. With sufficient intel, there will be a notification that the AI is planning to declare war on the player. Alrighty then. Okay, so if you have enough intel, they will tell you that stuff is going on. So you'll have another notification in games. Right now, we've got this notification of, hey, we're lower on stockpile. Instead, we will know that somebody is planning to declare war on us. Sounds like a big deal, actually, in terms of knowing what on earth is going on. Scale production of rare resources according to the size of their economy makes sense. All members of a federation will no longer propose a vote on law changes that have been proposed in the last 10 years by anyone in the federation. Thank the Lord. So no longer will they cause issues here. AI will now declare death spiral status if they have 0 minerals and a negative mineral income. Jobs consuming minerals will be deprioritized until sufficient mineral income has been reached and the empire can start rebuilding itself. Yeah, that's a big deal. Nobody wants to deal with dead empires. The player will now get a notification the AI has recalled their embassy. That's also new. The AI has better at dealing at non-standard colony ships, private colony ships, which I haven't used in such a long time because I just don't play Megacorps, but soon I will. And lithoid colony asteroids. AI will now sell resources more aggressively to buy what they need in order to recover from death spiral type situations, which is good because it lowers the cost of goods on the market. Fix several issues with the galactic community voting. AI will no longer propose resolutions against their alignment. AI can recall their proposals or vote against their own proposals in some situations where it makes sense. So, for instance, in this particular case, a slaving empire will no longer try to ban slavery. You know, common sense. UI, a new section outliner for the loaned out fleets. There's loaned fleets now, by the way. Tooltips for agreeing presets. The outliner will now tell you about blockers you can remove if you're approaching the planet's carrying capacity, therefore suffering planetary growth. So right now, if there is a blocker on a planet, and maybe we have one somewhere. Yes, we do over here. So if we fill all of these up and we still have these blockers available at the end, normally the game will tell us, hey, there's... you need to unblock this in order to build more districts. But instead, well, in addition, it will now take into account the carrying capacity of the planet, which basically says, hey, you want to increase your carrying capacity, remove this blocker. And you have the ability to it. So this feature, we're currently already removing this toxic kelp as example. Hey, remove this thing so you can increase your carrying capacity and that you're on the right side of the growth curve. The outliner will now tell you blockers you can remove if you're... I already talked about that. Improve the layout of the host DLC icons. Sure. Move copy server ID functionality. Sure. Optimized performance and stability. Always a thing. Long story short, they improve performance. Other improvements. Not that much. Significantly improved pop job assignment weightings. Automatic scripting handling, resource output. Essentially, jobs with the better trait for the job will be taking the job more reliably, which means that strong pops will probably take the mineral related jobs, as an example. Or robots that are not doing anything. Add a new subjugation war terms policy, which will set the default agreement terms when subjugating other empires through war. Okay. So this feels very similar to the species thing. So we have default rights. In addition to that, I guess it will be under contacts, where you can set the default agreement terms. So as I mentioned before, we can set default rights. And instead, we will probably get a screen saying, these are our default terms for you becoming a vassal. And that makes sense. I like that. I like that a lot. You can now nominate other empires to custodianship. Nice. Idyllic Bloom has now been improved by allowing construction of Gaia-seeding planets and holding to be built on a wider range of planetary bodies in exchange for increased upkeep depending on the empire's terraforming technology. Cool. Idyllic Bloom has been boosted. In addition, the Civic can now be combined with life-seeded and shattered ring origins. Finally, Idyllic Bloom's empires now start with a Phase 1 Gaia-seeder on their capital where appropriate. Very nice indeed. So you can turn into a Gaia world really early onwards. The question is, Idyllic Bloom. Is Idyllic Bloom plantoids only? Would I have access to Idyllic Bloom right now? Idyllic Bloom. Yes, I would. I would need to be fungoid and plantoids. So, unless you're playing as fungoids or plantoids, it's not really particularly applicable. Shroud entities that propose covenants will now prefer empires that have ethics and civics to match their outlook. The end of cycle will most likely offer a covenant to another empire that is a level 5 crisis. A level 5 crisis, end of cycle. I love it. Psionic crisis, end of cycle, with all those insane boosts. Dang. Several improvements to Ba'ul and Zroni spawning. They will no longer spawn arc sites on your capital system, I guess. One of the Ba'ul story arcs is now vastly less likely to spawn in somebody else's territory and now a bit less likely to spawn in a heap of neighboring systems. That's nice, so... you'll be able to control Ba'ul a little bit easier. Sharoni, I haven't seen in forever because of the initial requirement on, in order to trigger it. I believe it's a gas planet. But yeah, it's nice, I guess. Modifiers giving administrators output now correctly reflect the sort of administrators the Empire uses. Individual names for game objects can now be localized. Okay. Renamed the corporate and gestalt versions of catalytic processes to catalytic recycling and organic reprocessing, or respectively. QGIT. What is QGIT? We're going to need to make a mental note there for what a QGIT is. Bug fixes, there is a lot of them. Feel free to read them. They're in the bottom of the description to this particular dev diary if you want to read more. But, you know, fixed hyperlane shader. Some megastructures not animating properly. Missing modifier icons, that sort of stuff. Although apparently it also, they fixed the offset of the Dyson sphere not properly being put on a star if you're building it. Enrolled engineers in the curated seminar on Ringworld repairs in EU. Repaired Ringworlds from the Shattered Ring origin. Alpha Refuge no longer have display issues. Cool. Cool. Modding, there is a lot of stuff here. A lot of stuff. Expect some really cool mods. Especially in the category of, and now, yes, agreements, subject types, and other subject topics. This is extremely good for mods. Basically, you can trade anything in the game. Anything with another empire. A fleet, leaders, etc. You want to have a feudal house and trade your heir to another empire? You can do that in a mod now. It's crazy. You could literally make Crusader Kings in space by using this. Like, that's all I'm saying. It's a really big deal. It may not seem like a lot. It's so important. Agreements and any sort of trade deals were previously hard-coded into the game. Now it's part of mods. It's so important that this has been changed. And this is going to blow the entire lid off the modding scene. It's amazing. I love it. And that is essentially it. There is a lot of additional stuff here in terms of modding. Once again, you can read all of this in the link in the description below. But yeah, 3.4 Cepheus coming out in combination with the Overlord update next week already. It's big, it's beautiful, and I love it. It is so good. It's going to be amazing to see this. I'm really looking forward to these changes. Situations is a framework platform. You can do anything with it. Deficit rework, same thing. Subjugation, amazing. Micromanagement improvements, won't use them, but I'm sure there's use for them. 6th anniversary emblems, colors, backgrounds, I love it. I love it indeed. There's so much good stuff here, and I'd like to hear your opinion about it. I know this is a long-ass video, but if you have any feedback, let me know down in the comments. If you like the content, I know this is not what we usually do here with Stellaris, just reading out patch notes, but this right here, we have to do these every once in a while because it is important. Feel free to give us a subscribe, and in the meantime, we're going to go wrap this up here. Thank you to my patrons for making this video possible, and until next time, take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you in Cepheus.